A glass shattered against a concrete floor. A man laughed. It was a wet laugh, the kind a man gives when he thinks he owns the room. Two bodyguards reached for the pistols on their belts. Nobody else moved. A boot scraped 1 inch forward. Just 1 inch. Every gun in that room heard it. The biker hadn't said a word in 4 minutes. His hands lay flat on the table. His jaw was locked. His eyes never left the man in the white suit, the man everyone called Don Rafael. Don Rafael had just made a joke. The joke was about a dead woman. The biker's name was Cole Harlan. He was road captain of the Iron Saints, and the woman in the joke was his mother. What Cole did next left every man in that room frozen for the rest of his life. Stay with me on this one. To understand what just happened, you have to back up about 4 hours. The meeting wasn't supposed to go like this. It was supposed to be a peace treaty. The room was on the 2nd floor of an old hacienda 30 miles south of the border. The Cartel owned the building. Don Rafael Cardenas owned them. A man called Father Aurelio had set the meeting. He was an old priest. Worn face, white collar, a quiet way of talking. He'd buried more cartel sons than he could count, and he'd married more biker daughters than he should have. Both sides trusted him. That's a rare thing in this world. A man 2 enemies will sit across from. Now here's the thing. 6 weeks earlier, a shipment had gone missing on a stretch of road the Iron Saints controlled. 40 kilos of product. 2 of Don Rafael's men dead in a ditch. The cartel said the Iron Saints took it. The Iron Saints said they didn't. And in their world, when 2 sides disagree about that kind of money, somebody bleeds. Father Aurelio called the meeting to keep it from turning into a war. 5 men aside, no more. No weapons on the table. Bodyguards in the corners. He sat between them. The Iron Saints sent 3. Their club president, a man they called Bishop. Their secretary, a man they called Wire. And their road captain, Cole Harlan. Cole was 41. 6'3", beard down to his sternum, gray on the edges. He didn't speak much. When he did, men listened. The club called him road captain because his job was to ride at the front and look at what was coming. He'd been doing that for 20 years. He'd seen everything you can see on a road. But here's what most of the men in that room didn't know. 6 months earlier, Cole had buried his mother. Her name was Iris Harlan. 68 years old. She'd worked 3 jobs most of her life. Raised Cole by herself in a trailer outside Bakersfield after his father walked out. She was 4'11" on her best day, 90 pounds soaking wet. And she was, by every account from every man who ever met her, the toughest person any of them had ever known. Iris had been sick a long time. Cancer first, then the treatment that's almost as bad as the cancer. Cole moved her into his house the last year. He cooked her meals. He brushed her hair when she couldn't lift her arms. He read to her in the evening because the medication blurred the words on the page. She died on a Tuesday in March. Cole was holding her hand. He buried her in the rain. The whole club came. Bishop spoke at the grave. Cole didn't say a word the whole service. He just stood there, hat in his hand, water running off the brim, looking down at the box. After the funeral, he didn't ride for 2 months. The club let him be. When he came back, he was the same man on the outside. But there was something different in his eyes that the brothers all saw and none of them mentioned. He carried a photo of her in his cut. A small black and white one. She was in her 30s in the picture, holding a baby that was him, both of them squinting into the sun. That photo was in his cut when he walked into the hacienda that afternoon. Now, the cartel side. Don Rafael Cardenas was 62. Heavy-set, silver hair slicked back. White linen suit that probably cost more than the cars some of his men drove. He'd been head of the Cardinal Cartel for 18 years. 18 years is a long time in that job. Most don't last 5. He'd kept the seat by being smarter than the men around him and crueler than the men against him. He had a habit. When he wanted to test a man, he'd insult him. Something small at first. Watch how he reacted. If the man swallowed it, Don Raphael knew he could push him. If the man pushed back, Don Raphael respected him. Either way, he learned something. That was his method. He'd used it for 2 decades. It had never failed him. He didn't know yet that he'd brought it into a room with a man who had just buried his mother. Stakes were already on the table. 40 kilos of product. 2 dead men. A war that could spread across 3 states. Nobody in that room knew that those weren't the real stakes anymore. The meeting started polite. Father Aurelio spoke first. He laid out the issue, the missing shipment, the 2 dead men, the accusations on both sides. He asked everyone to keep it civil. Both sides nodded. Bishop spoke for the Iron Saints. He said his club didn't take the shipment. He said if his men had taken it, he'd have known. He said the Iron Saints don't operate that way. Don Raphael smiled. He didn't believe a word of it, but he was willing to let it ride. For a price. The price was steep. Compensation. A new route arrangement. A percentage going forward. Bishop bristled. Cole, beside him, didn't move. They went back and forth for an hour. Numbers. Routes. Conditions. Father Aurelio kept the peace. Slowly, the deal started to take shape. Then Don Raphael did the thing he always did. He decided to test the men across from him. He picked the smallest one first. A kid the Iron Saints had brought along called Toad. He cracked a joke about Toad's height. Toad laughed it off. Don Raphael nodded. Okay. That one swallowed it. He picked Bishop next. He cracked a joke about Bishop's age. Said his beard looked like it was made of cobwebs. Bishop laughed it off. Don Raphael nodded again. Okay. That one swallowed too. Then he looked at Cole. Cole hadn't laughed at either joke. Hadn't smiled. Hadn't reacted at all. Just sat there with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on Don Raphael. Don Raphael noticed. He noticed everything. Now here's the thing about cartel bosses. They have networks. They have eyes everywhere. When you sit across from one, you have to assume he's done his homework. Don Raphael had done his. He knew Cole had a mother. He knew when she died. He knew where she was buried. He knew how much the hospice cost. Cole had pulled money out of the club's emergency fund to cover the last 2 months. And Don Raphael's intel had picked that up. He'd been saving this, holding it back, waiting for the moment. He looked Cole in the eye. He took a slow sip of brandy. He set the glass down on the table. And then he said it. I'm not going to write the full thing here, out of respect. But I'll tell you what he said in shape, not in words. He took Cole's mother's name. He said it out loud. He used it in a sentence that combined her death with a sexual joke. He referenced the hospice. He referenced the rain at her funeral. He referenced the fact that Cole had brushed her hair. And he ended with a punchline that turned her last hours into a setup for a laugh. It was calculated. Every detail was a knife. He'd been preparing this for weeks. When he finished, he laughed. Wet. Full of teeth. One of his bodyguards smirked. The other looked at the floor. Bishop went pale. He looked at Cole. He didn't know what to do. Father Aurelio's mouth opened and closed and no sound came out. The old priest crossed himself. Cole didn't move. Not for 1 second. Not for 2. Not for 10. His hands stayed flat on the table. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His breathing didn't change. Don Raphael's smile started to flicker. Now here's the part where most men would have made it worse. Most men would have stood up. Most men would have shouted. Most men would have lunged across the table and gotten themselves shot. Cole didn't. He reached forward, slowly, toward the pitcher of water in the center of the table. The bodyguards twitched. Their hands moved toward their pistols. Don Raphael raised one finger. The bodyguards stopped. Cole poured himself a glass of water. He didn't look at anyone. He poured it slow. He set the pitcher back down. He picked up the glass. He took a sip. He set it down. He nodded once, like a man who's just heard something and is thinking about it. He looked at Father Aurelio. He gave the old priest a small, tight smile, like he was saying, "We're okay. We're okay." He looked at Bishop. He nodded again. Bishop exhaled. So did Wire. So did Father Aurelio. The room let out a breath it had been holding for a full minute. Don Raphael grinned. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd just learned something important. That the road captain of the Iron Saints would swallow anything. That he could be pushed. That the rest of the negotiation was now going his way. He picked up his brandy. He raised it slightly. He said, "Salute." Bishop reached for his own glass. Father Aurelio pulled out a small notebook to write down the terms. The bodyguards relaxed. One of them lowered his hand from his belt to his thigh. The other lit a cigarette. The meeting was back on track. The Iron Saints were going to take the insult. The cartel was going to take the win. The deal was going to close. Don Raphael set his glass down a little too hard. Clipped the edge of the table. The glass slipped. It fell to the concrete floor and shattered. Nobody looked at it. Nobody cared. A bodyguard scoffed and reached for a rag. In that exact moment, Cole Harlan moved 1 inch forward in his chair. Just 1 inch. And every man in that room in that exact second knew. The deal wasn't done. The insult wasn't swallowed. The water hadn't calmed him. The water had given him time. Time to decide what he was going to do. Cole spoke for the first time in 2 hours. One word. Repeat. His voice was flat, quiet. He wasn't asking. He was telling Don Raphael what was going to happen next. Don Raphael blinked. He looked at Cole. He looked at his bodyguards. He looked back at Cole. And then he laughed. "Repeat what?" he said. Cole didn't move. Didn't answer. Didn't look away. The room got very still. Father Aurelio set down his pen. Bishop's hand froze halfway to his glass. Don Raphael's smile twitched. He glanced at his bodyguards. He'd given them no signal. He didn't know yet whether he needed to. He decided to push. "The joke," he said. "You want me to repeat the joke?" Cole nodded once. Slow. Don Raphael laughed again. Louder this time. He spread his hands. He looked around the room like he was performing for an audience. "All right," he said. "All right. The biker wants to hear it again." And he repeated it. But here's the part. He didn't just repeat it. He embellished it. He made it crueler. He added a new detail. Something about Cole brushing his mother's hair while she begged for it to end. He added another about her ashes. He added a line about Cole's grief making him weak. He stretched it out. He made sure every man in the room heard every word. When he was done, he leaned back. He folded his hands on his belly. He grinned. His bodyguards weren't smiling anymore. Now here's something most people don't know about cartel bodyguards. They aren't loyal. They're paid. They follow the boss as long as the boss looks like a boss. The second the boss looks like a fool, the math changes. The bodyguards had just watched their patron repeat, with embellishment, a vile joke about a dead mother, in front of a stranger who hadn't flinched the first time. In their world, you only push that hard when you have the muscle to back it up. And the muscle in this room was them. They were starting to wonder if their boss had just written a check they were going to have to cash. Cole stood up. Bishop said his name. Just once. Quiet. "Cole." Cole didn't look at him. He pushed his chair back. He walked around the end of the table, toward Don Raphael's side. The bodyguards came alive. Both pistols out. Both pointed at Cole's chest. Cole kept walking. Don Raphael raised one hand. The bodyguards held. "Friend," Don Raphael said. Smile thin. "You're going to want to sit back down." Cole didn't sit back down. He didn't speak. He didn't slow. He stopped 6 feet from Don Raphael's chair. He looked down at the cartel boss. The bodyguard's pistols were 3 feet from his ribs. If you're still with me on this story, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. There's more like this coming, and I want you to see them when they drop. Now back to the room. Cole reached into the inside pocket of his cut. The bodyguards tensed. One of them put pressure on the trigger. Don Rafael raised his hand again, sharper this time. Cole's hand came out slow. Empty fingers. Then a photograph. Small. Black and white. The corners soft from being carried for years. He set it down on the table. Right in front of Don Rafael. A young woman. A baby. The son behind them. That's her, Cole said. Don Rafael looked down at the photograph. His smile got smaller. You said her name, Cole said. You used her name in your mouth. So now you're going to look at her. Don Rafael looked back up at Cole. The smile tried to come back. It didn't quite make it. Friend, he said again. You're standing in my house. With my men. With guns on you. You want to think about what you're doing. I've thought about it, Cole said. He hadn't raised his voice. Not once. He looked at the bodyguards. One on the left, one on the right. You boys put those down or you fire them, he said. Either way is fine. Neither one moved. Don Rafael shifted in his chair. He was looking for an out. Any out. A way to turn this back into his room. He looked at the door. The door wouldn't help. He looked at Father Aurelio. The old priest's eyes were on the table. He looked at his bodyguards. This was the moment. He could give the order. He could end it right here with 2 shots. The Iron Saints would have a dead road captain. The cartel would have a war on its hands. But he'd be alive. He'd be standing. He'd be Don Rafael Cardenas of the Cardinal Cartel, the man who killed bikers in his own dining room. He opened his mouth to give the order. He saw the bodyguard on the right look at the bodyguard on the left. It was a look that lasted less than a second. But Don Rafael caught it. And he understood it. The look said, "Are we really doing this for that joke?" Now here's what the bodyguards were thinking. I'll tell you because the rest of the story doesn't make sense if you don't understand it. These men were killers. They'd done terrible things. But every killer has a code somewhere. Even the ones who don't admit it. And the code, almost universally in that world, says you don't touch a man's mother. You don't speak her name. You don't go near her grave. You don't bring her into a room. Not on purpose. Not for a laugh. It's not sentimentality. It's older than that. It's the one line nobody crosses because crossing it tells every other man in the room what kind of man you are. And what they'll be working for. Don Rafael had crossed it. His bodyguards were standing there pointing pistols at a man who, in their private code, was in the right. And they were waiting to see what their boss was going to do about the fact that he was, in their private code, in the wrong. Don Rafael closed his mouth. He didn't give the order. He looked at Cole. Cole hadn't moved. You want me to apologize to a photograph? Don Rafael said. Quiet. Almost to himself. To her, Cole said. Not to it. To her. A long silence. Don Rafael's hand moved. Slow. He reached forward across the table. His fingers hovered over the photograph for a second. 2 seconds. He picked it up. His hand was shaking. A small shake. But every man in that room saw it. He held the picture up in front of his face. He looked at Iris Harlan, 30-something, holding her baby boy in the sun. He swallowed. He didn't speak right away. Cole waited. The whole room waited. Don Rafael Cardenas, who had ordered the deaths of more men than the average general, who had buried rivals and judges and reporters, who hadn't apologized to a living soul since he was a teenager. Don Rafael looked at the small black and white photograph of a dead woman in his hand. And he said, "Forgive me, Senora." His voice cracked on the last word. He set the picture down on the table. He didn't look at Cole. He couldn't. He looked at the table. Cole reached forward. Slow. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it. He brushed his thumb across the surface of it. Once, gentle, where Don Rafael's fingers had been. Then he tucked it back into the inside pocket of his cut. Nobody spoke. The bodyguards lowered their pistols. Cole looked at Don Rafael for one more second. He didn't gloat. He didn't sneer. He just looked. Then he turned and walked back to his chair. He didn't sit down. He picked up his cut from the back of the chair. He put it on. Bishop stood up. Wire stood up. They didn't say anything. They didn't need to. Father Aurelio rose from his seat. He crossed himself. His lips were moving in a prayer that nobody heard. Cole spoke one more time, without looking at Don Raphael. "There's no deal," he said. "We're leaving." Bishop nodded. Don Raphael didn't object. He was staring at the table, at the brandy in front of him, at the broken glass on the floor that someone had forgotten to clean up. He didn't lift his head when the Iron Saints walked past him. He didn't lift his head when the door closed behind them. He didn't lift his head when his bodyguards exchanged another look, a longer one this time. He sat there, white suit, silver hair, hands folded on the table, the most powerful man in 3 states, sitting alone in a room where the air had changed. Outside the hacienda, the Iron Saints walked across the gravel to their bikes. Nobody spoke. Bishop was watching Cole out of the corner of his eye. Cole was looking at the horizon. When they got to the bikes, Bishop finally said it. "You just started a war." Cole shook his head. "No," he said. "We finished one." He swung a leg over his bike. He fired it up. The engine cracked the silence. Bishop and Wire mounted their bikes. They rode out of the hacienda compound in single file. Cole at the front, where the road captain belongs. Behind them, in the dining room of the hacienda, Don Raphael was still staring at the table, and his bodyguards were still looking at each other. Word travels fast in that world, faster than you'd think. By that night, 3 of Don Raphael's lieutenants had heard a version of what happened in the dining room. By the next morning, all of them had. By the end of the week, every serious player in the cartel knew that Don Rafael Cardenas had picked up a photograph of a dead woman and apologized to her in front of 2 bikers and his own men. The story changed in the telling the way stories do. Some versions had Cole pulling a gun. Some had him holding a knife to Don Rafael's throat. Some had Don Rafael crying. But the part that didn't change was the part that mattered. Don Rafael had picked up the picture. His own men had watched him do it. That was the part that did the damage. Within a week, 2 of Don Rafael's lieutenants stopped returning his calls. Within 2 weeks, a shipment went missing, and this time it wasn't the Iron Saints. It was an inside job. Within 3 weeks, Don Rafael was found in his car outside a restaurant in Culiacan. His own driver had done it. The driver was paid by a lieutenant. The lieutenant moved up the chair. That was the cartel side. The Iron Saints side was quieter. Bishop called a club meeting 2 days after the hacienda. He laid out what had happened. He said he expected retaliation. He said the club needed to be ready. The retaliation never came. When Don Rafael died 3 weeks later, the new boss had no interest in continuing the feud. The new boss had a different opinion of the Iron Saints, which is to say, he didn't want to find out what they did when you went after their road captain. He sent a quiet message through Father Aurelio. The 40 kilos were forgotten. The 2 dead men were forgotten. The route arrangement stayed where it was. There was no war. There was no deal. There was just silence. And that silence said everything. Cole rode home the night after the hacienda. He pulled into his driveway around 2 in the morning. He killed the engine. He sat on the bike for a long time before he went inside. He went into the kitchen. He put on a pot of coffee. He sat down at the table. He pulled the photograph out of his cut. He laid it down in front of him. He looked at it. After a long time, he got up. He walked to a drawer in the hallway. He opened it. Inside were the letters his mother had written him over the years. Birthdays, Christmases, the summer he was in the hospital when he was 19, the week his father died, the week his first marriage ended. He took them out. He brought them to the kitchen table. He set them down next to the photograph. He sat there with his coffee getting cold. He read one, then another, then another. He didn't read them out loud. He didn't cry. He just read them. Around 4 in the morning he came to the last one. It was the shortest. She'd written it in the hospice. Her handwriting was almost gone by then. Shaky, thin, hard to follow. But the words were clear. Don't carry me like a weight. Carry me like a hand on your shoulder. That's all I am. That's all I ever was. Cole read it twice. Then he folded it. He folded all of them. He put them back in the drawer. He went to the kitchen window. It was still dark outside. He could see the outline of the hill behind his house. He stood there for a while. He said, "I answered for you, Mom." He didn't say it loud. He said it the way a man says something to the dead, quiet, plain, the way you'd say it if she were still in the next room. He drank the rest of his coffee cold. He walked back to the table. He picked up the photograph. He looked at it one more time. He slid it back into the inside pocket of his cut. He hung the cut on the back of the chair. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. That's where the story ends. Not in the dining room. Not in the gravel outside the hacienda. Not in the funeral of a cartel boss 3 weeks later. The story ends at a kitchen table at 4 in the morning, with a tired man putting his mother's letters back in a drawer. Now here's the thing. You're not going to read about Cole Harlan in any newspaper. You're not going to see his name in a book. The Iron Saints don't talk about that day. The cartel doesn't talk about that day. Father Aurelio went to his grave without telling the story to a single soul. The only reason it's being told now is because one of the bodyguards talked. Years later, after he got out of the life, he told it once to a writer in a bar in El Paso. He said it was the only time in his career he ever saw a man stop a war without firing a shot. He said the silence in that dining room, after Don Rafael apologized to the photograph, was the loudest silence he'd ever heard. He said you could feel the air change. He said in that silence, every man in that room understood what a mother was worth, and what it cost to forget. And he said, last thing he told the writer before he walked out of the bar, he said he hoped his own son would carry his picture the same way. That's the story. A glass shattered. A man laughed. And a quiet man stood up for a woman who couldn't stand up for herself anymore. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise his hand. He raised her name. And the room froze.